Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. As you know, one of our favorite topics to cover on the channel is discussing the power and influence of the ancient Sith Lords. One of the most infamous and most powerful of these ancient Sith Lords has been none other than one of my favorite, Darth Nihilus, who made his grand debut in the video game Knights of the Old Republic 2. Since then, many comics and novels have been released delving into the story of Darth Nihilus, the legend of one of the greatest Dark Lords that have ever existed, the Lord of Hunger. Nihilus's ability of Force Drain is what made him the stuff of legend both in and outside of the Star Wars mythos. Being a walking wound in the Force, Nihilus was forced to feed on any Force-sensitive being in order to stay alive and preserve what was left of his dying soul. However, the more he fed, the more his hunger grew. It got to the point where he was forced to feed on an entire planet in order to remain alive. Despite this ability being his namesake, it actually will not be the topic of today's video. The Dark Lord of Hunger was privy to many powerful Sith abilities that many do not know about, which is exactly what we will be covering today. In order to actually find the beings he would feed on, Nihilus was able to reach his senses through the Force and stretch it out over the entire galaxy. Using his ability of Farsight, he could also see people or locations in real time through Force visions. Darth Nihilus was literally able to feel planets and where they were and how much Force energy they contained in order for him to travel there and feed upon them at this point in time. Several years after his official birth, his hunger was fully controlling him. As we stated earlier, Nihilus was a walking wound in the Force. What this means is that when a horrific event occurs that there is a significant loss of life all at once, it creates a disturbance in the Force, or a wound. Nihilus was a literal wound. These wounds can be instantly felt by almost all Force-sensitive beings around the galaxy. When the mass shadow generator was set off by Darth Revan, it created a wound in the Force on Malachor 5, which manifested itself into Darth Nihilus. Nihilus radiated dark side energy, and it was so bad that his very speech caused the pain and death to all those that could hear it. There are actually similar dark side powers to this, such as Dark Glare, which can end up in similar results, though this ability requires the user to maintain constant eye connection and intense focus, which creates an invisible beam of energy that can sear the flesh of the target and even cause death. A similar ability occurred with Darth Bane, who absolutely despised his father, and simply by thinking of him and focusing his hatred caused his father to have a heart attack. Whether or not Bane intended this to happen, Darth Nihilus, on the other hand, can merely speak, and his own voice creates torment of all living things in his vicinity. Nihilus was adept at many powerful aspects of the Force, and used a dark version of Sever Force ability on Darth Traya. Sever Force was a non-lethal Force power that allowed the user to briefly interrupt the flow of the Force within a target for a short amount of time. However, the way Nihilus used it, he was able to kill the midichlorians within Traya, and strip her of her Force ability completely. This is a huge deal in Star Wars lore. Darth Plagueis' life work was the study of the midichlorians, or more specifically, how to manipulate them into creating life, so that one day he could become the master of life and death itself. Despite Darth Plagueis' conviction, he died right on the cusp of finding the secret to creating eternal life. It is possible that Plagueis may never have known this ability, or simply never spoke of it or used it before, but Nihilus, on the other hand, had no qualms about turning such a game-changing ability around on his former master and stripping her of the Force completely, making Darth Traya weak and casting her out of the Sith Order completely. Darth Traya herself was no mere acolyte either. Traya was a powerful Dark Lady of the Sith and an experienced Sith sorceress. She used her powers in alchemy to create some truly horrific designs, and for the longest time, she controlled Darth Nihilus up until he outgrew and eclipsed her power. Needless to say, Nihilus was also incredibly strong with telekinesis, able to lift entire starships out of the surface of Malachor 5 in order to create his ghost fleet. He did this with his flagship, the Ravager, tearing it from the mass shadow that surrounded the planet and kept it together even though it had suffered extensive structural damage. The only other character that comes to mind that can contend with this feat is Grandmaster Yoda himself, who, during the Battle of Coruscant, caused two droid gunships to crash into one another. Not to sell Master Yoda short, but he did divert a ship off of its course, able to make it change directions. Nihilus here, though, had fully lifted the flagship out of the ground and brought it into the very orbit of the planet. Darth Nihilus was a terror on the battlefield for any poor Jedi to be caught facing. His command over the dark side brought him a vast array of powers, including Force Rage. Force Rage would tap into his innermost fears, pain, and hatred, and convert them into an intense rage, fueling his power. The user could then channel the anger to increase his own strength, speed, agility, and endurance, as well as his stamina, and most importantly, his ferocity. This often aided Darth Nihilus in battle anytime he had to use his lightsaber, although oftentimes he would rather rely on his extensive abilities in the dark side of the Force. Although Nihilus did not often implement his lightsaber, he was proficient with it. Nihilus was known for using an aggressive one-handed style that might have either been Makashi or a single-handed Djemso. I imagine that the Force Rage was something he often did to overwhelm the defenses of any Jedi opponent. Darth Nihilus was also proficient with his use of Force Lightning. However, Nihilus's lightning was red in coloration, which is known to be the deadliest of all the lightning colors. The red lightning was known to be so powerful that it could briefly strip someone of their Force attunement, and prolonged exposure could cause the target to disintegrate completely. Nihilus could also use the ability of Force Scream, the same ability used by Darth Sidious to inspire fear in Windu and the other Jedi Masters during Revenge of the Sith, when the Jedi Masters confronted Sidious within his office. Not to mention, in my opinion, one of Nihilus's most powerful and disturbing abilities, the use of Force Plague. Force Plague allowed Nihilus to enter his opponent's mind and cloud it, effectively dominating their will, which gave him even more edge in combat. Force Plague worked much like a fast-acting poison, quickly debilitating the target. The effects of it worsened over time and may cause death if the user is strong enough in the Force. This is something that I believe is most interesting about the character of Nihilus. If you were more gifted in the Force, essentially Nihilus always had a greater edge against you, whether or not he would feed on your very Force attunement or penetrate your mind, controlling you completely. But the terrors of Nihilus still go on. He was also able to use the Force ability known as Force Whirlwind, a more advanced version of Force Push. Nihilus would alter the air currents around an opponent, turning it into a maelstrom. The swirling Force energy would lift an opponent into the air, spin them around, and then leave them incapable of moving out of it. This allowed Nihilus to attack without resistance, picking apart his opponents at will. One of the most accomplished feats of the dark side ability accomplished by Nihilus was his ability to use a dark side variant of Force Healing, which was called Dark Healing. We saved the best for last. Notoriously, dark side users were unable to use any sort of Force Healing, as that was strictly a light side ability. Darth Bane famously stated at one point in time that he did not pursue the use of Force Healing, as pain made the dark side stronger. Not to mention, only through compassion could a Force wielder be able to heal, something that no Sith was willing to do. In order to heal, a Sith would have to compromise their ideals in exchange for using the light side. However, Lord Nihilus and Darth Sion somehow both found a peculiar way of getting around this by manipulating the dark side in such a way that they were able to find a loophole, gaining more vitality by feeding on the suffering of others. So friends, what do you think of these dark side powers of Nihilus? For those of you that haven't played Knights of the Old Republic 2, did you find any of these abilities surprising? Also, if you enjoyed this form of video where we break down the many Force abilities of a character, please leave a like and suggest other characters that you would like to see explored in the comments down below. As always, Acolytes, thank you so much for watching and continuing to support the channel. May the Force be with you, and I hope you have a great day.